Ta-da! So, as I said before, Bible Q&A. Boom, boom, boom. Talking about Luke chapter 22. Now, as I mentioned just a little bit beforehand, the question at hand is about Jesus' prayer on the Mount of Olives in Luke chapter 22. The specific verse in particular is verse 42. Father, if you will, please don't make me suffer by having me drink from this cup, but do what you want, not what I want. Then an angel from heaven came to help him. Jesus was in great pain and prayed so sincerely that his sweat fell to the ground like drops of blood. And this is a very emotional moment for Jesus. What we have here is we have a guy who, as we see, in other moments in the Gospels where his emotions really show. In the Gospel of John, when he, flips the tables of the money changers and the animal sellers in the temple, when he cries with Lazarus' sisters after they arrive at his funeral and Lazarus is obviously dead. But at the same time, though Jesus has these emotions, you look at what happens afterwards, and there's something else tied up in it. Like even though Jesus cries at how awful death is, and the horribleness of it, he raises Lazarus from the dead. So he's not crying because Lazarus died. He's crying because of just death in general. He's crying because of the grief that everyone has, feeling that pain. Just in the same way that this anger takes over and he flips the tables in the temple. Well, why? Because he's upset, man. He is upset. As he says himself, he says, this is supposed to be, a house of God, but you've turned it into a den of thieves, He mad, as they like to say online. So another question that popped up in the chat room regarding this. Where is it here? I gotta find it. Gotta find it. Nope, I went past it. Where is it here? Do you think that Jesus was sharing that level of emotion because he was going to be separated from God temporarily? And there is, some people believe different things about this, but it's a very popular notion that by taking the sins of the world upon himself, that Jesus was disconnected from God in some way, that he had been connected with God all the way up until that point. Very interesting idea, but you go to the crucifixion and something very interesting happens there, and actually something very similar to this emotional sort of thing. And let's see if it's in here in Luke. Let's see. Yeah, I think it is. Nope, it's not in Luke specifically, but in one of the Gospels, Jesus, right before he dies, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then other Gospels say that after that, he said, it is finished. And it's interesting because it's noted in the Gospels that Jesus seemed fine up until that point, but then he died. Like he could have lasted a little bit longer on that cross. I mean, obviously he was going to die, but it's just like he gave up. Specifically in Luke, it says here, that Jesus shouted, Father, I put myself in your hands. Then he died. And of course, the Roman officer saw what happened. He praised God and said, Jesus must have been a really good man. It's also interesting that, in Luke, it also mentions that when Jesus is being crucified, he says, forgive these people, Father, they don't know what they are doing. But the idea that right at the end, that Jesus somehow lost that connection, what God, why have you forsaken me? That God turned his face away from Jesus, that the Holy Spirit departed from him. I think that's something that is a really powerful thought. And I think that Jesus was experiencing those emotions of what was going to happen when he was praying. You know, God, don't make me do this unless I have to, but I will do whatever you want me to do. I think that where Jesus is coming from with that is he's coming from this place where quite possibly he'd never experienced what it was like to be disconnected from God. As a perfect and sinless person, a person without sin, okay? The way humanity was almost intended to be, as it were, to just be cut off from God like that. To think, quite possibly, that it was when Jesus was on the cross, right before he died, that he experienced that. And that it was so terrible that it was like the final blow. After everything else that happened, that was the final blow. That's how some of the Gospels set it up. That's how they do it. But it's also interesting to think about it from that perspective, that Jesus experienced what we experience every day and what we perceive to be perfectly normal for just a short time. Now, is that exactly right? I don't know. That's more of just like a philosophical musing from me. Don't take that as fact, okay? Please don't. The idea that, Jesus didn't necessarily know what it was like. I think that Jesus related to us very well, basically. So yeah, bit of amusing, bit of me just kind of going off on a rabbit trail and thinking about, the ramifications of what that must have been like on the cross. Obviously, none of us can imagine what it was like. That's part of the reason why Jesus had to do it to begin with, because nothing that we could have done would have been enough. That's the point. The point is that nothing we could have done would have been enough. And what Jesus did was enough. Thank goodness it was. Seriously, you guys. So, yeah, hopefully that answers the follow-up question. Do you think that Jesus was sharing that level of emotion because he was going to be separated from God temporarily? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, being separated from God when you're part of the Trinity, probably a pretty big deal, I'd say. Probably. Anyway, that's a follow-up question. Original question, why was Jesus asking God whether or not to, whether or not he had to go through with the plan? It's just out of emotion, As I mentioned before, when I wasn't recording, and my apologies, internet people, that just comes down to me, that's just emotions. Jesus was fully man and fully God, which means he had full emotions, right? And as I mentioned before, we see those emotions in the Gospels sometimes. We see them come out. But our emotions don't necessarily define us, and sometimes the things we say don't match our heart. And we have to remember that it's our heart that God is looking at. Sometimes, we get mad, we get angry, we get disappointed, depressed, crushed. And sometimes we feel that way about God, and maybe we say something to God. Maybe we just say like, God, I hate you right now, or God, I don't understand you. Why didn't you do this or that? But sometimes in our heart, at the same time, our heart is saying like, you're just mad. Why? Settle down, man. And it's the same way if we're yelling at a friend, though. Sometimes we know our friends are right, but we're just mad, and so we keep being mad at them. And it's just one of the things that we can't control. Jesus controlled his emotions very, very well. We aren't so good at that. But it's a lesson to be learned. A lot of people think emotions are bad because we can't control them, but it's not that they're bad, it's that they just have to be reined in. So, I don't know, I just think it was a very human moment from him. It's one of those parts of the Bible where Jesus is definitely not, God, miracles and booming loud voice and the long flowing hair and the beard. Oh, always the beard. That's not the Jesus we see there. What we see there is a very broken, humble, and frightened person. And I think that's something that is powerful to remember. If you're ever feeling broken or frightened at something, Jesus was there. He's been there. I think that's comforting. I don't think that's daunting or frightening or weird at all. I think it's one of the most comforting things in the good book. Anyway, let's get back to more music because I've talked a lot now, almost 20 minutes of Bible Q&A tonight. Woo! So, yeah. Remember, you can always submit questions. Really easy to do. Just send them through remedylive.com/questions. Fill out the form there and you're good to go. Here's Plum with Need You Now, right here on Remedy Live, where we chat, we listen, and we love.